Okay, ready. Maybe we can start our video.
We start video?
Yep, we live ready. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Sham here from SBF.
Okay.
We're going to have our webinar for updates on the Indonesia impact on the COVID-19 and also about doing business in Indonesia also. So before we go further, thank you, Angeline, and thank you, Pak Shoeb, and thank you, Pak Andrew, to join us on the latest slide. Maybe you all can intro yourself. So I'm going to go forward. Maybe I give a bit overview about SBF. Okay, we have the COVID-biz helpline where we can help SMEs, companies, okay, to navigate about the grant that's being supported by the government, and also any related issue about COVID-19 that you need help, the SBF will help us. So you can give a hotline at 6701138. So next, we're going to have also the SBF Manpower Connect, where we have a company in this current situation mode, where they have over manpower. We can also match them with a company that have less manpower that they can connect together, and that's where Manpower Connect will help SMEs. Then we move on. Beyond borders, we have the Global Connect. This is an initiative from Enterprise Singapore with us. So we assist SMEs to go globalization, internationalization. We assist them on one-on-one advisory. We assist them to get to know a business partner in a country that they are interested. Like for now, is Indonesia. So there's more other market going on. So try to contact Global Connect if you are interested to go to global. So then we have also the Overseas Market Workshop, where we help companies to go and enter to the market to understand more about the market. So other than Global Connect, we also have a business mission, the Overseas Market Workshop, so that our SBF can help companies to understand more and deeper about the market. Okay, so we go straight away to our speaker. We have Angeline from Angeline Suparto Law Corporation. We also have Pak Andrew on the Indonesia side, and Angeline is in Singapore side. And also we have Pak Shoeb from Singapore Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia. And also he's also founder for Synthesis, also Indonesia Economic Forum. He did Indonesia very success, and also later the government agencies and other big corporations on there. So maybe Angeline, you can start to introduce yourself.
All right, thank you so much, Sham. Good morning and warm greetings to everyone. I hope you are all keeping safe and healthy. So first of all, our sincere thanks to SBF on organizing this webinar. And we are honored, both me and Andrew are honored to contribute to these impressive efforts and initiatives taken by SBF in relation to the Indonesian market. We are very encouraged to see so many of you online and expressing an interest on the topic at hand. Now, with its rich natural resources, abundant labor supply, a huge domestic market, and geographical proximity with Singapore, Indonesia is a logical destination for many Singapore companies to do business with or invest in. I'd like to introduce my elder son, Andrew, who is a partner in our Jakarta law office. Now, Andrew grew up in Singapore and holds both an Indonesian and UK law degree. So as such, he's very familiar with both our common law system as well as the civil law system in Indonesia. Andrew has been based in Indonesia for more than 15 years, and as such, he has an excellent command of spoken and written Bahasa Indonesia, in addition to English, Mandarin, and Cantonese. So as for myself, I have been involved in advising clients on Indonesian cross-border transactions for the past 35 years. I'm based in Singapore, and I work very closely with Andrew in relation to Indonesian transactions. Now, in our joint presentation this morning, Andrew and I will be providing some general analysis, key insights, invaluable on-the-ground experience debunking myths, and also share some case studies with you. We hope you'll find this sharing to be informative and helpful, and whether you are a veteran, seasoned veteran in the Indonesian market, or a new market entrant. So, and of course, at the end, we have allocated quite a fair bit of time for questions and answers, and we hope that this will be a very interesting and useful interactive session. Rest assured, we will not be giving you a law lecture, but we will be sharing some very practical experience and insights. So with this, I would like to pass the platform to Andrew. Thank you. Andrew, here you go.
Yes, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Okay, let me try to share my screen.
Can you share a bit about yourself as what Ibu Angeline has said? Then after that, we have also Pak Shoeb sharing about himself.
Sure. So basically, so I'm born in Hong Kong, and then grew up in Singapore. So now based in Indonesia. So I very much understand the foreign investors' mentality, and also understand the Indonesian culture. So sometimes doing in business, in a sense, praise God, I'm very blessed. I get to enjoy best of both worlds. So in a sense, I try to bridge the communication between the foreign investor and the Indonesian side, partners, and of course, including regulators, all right, and on how to make the investment successful. So with this, I hope that after this session, potential investors and participants will have a better understanding of investing in Indonesia. I will now take the opportunity to pass the time over to Pak Shoeb.
Fabulous. Thank you. Pak Shoeb, over to you, Pak Shoeb, please.
Thank you very much, Sham, and thank you for inviting me to participate as a speaker in this, I think, very useful and very timely webinar on doing business in Indonesia, given this COVID-19 situation. I've been in Indonesia since 1998. I arrived as the correspondent for the Singapore Business Times. I worked in media. I worked in basically in media in both foreign and Indonesian companies. I set up my own media consulting firm called Synthesis Communications in 2014. What I do is I help investors and companies really understand not just the nitty-gritty of getting started in Indonesia, but understanding the political landscape, understanding the key trends that are driving Indonesia. We look at a trajectory over the next 20 years, as Ibu Angeline has mentioned. Indonesia's growth story and growth potential is indisputed. But I think we also have to be very mindful of the fact that it doesn't mean the streets are paved with gold. People have to do their homework. People have to understand the situation, understand the political dynamics of Indonesia, and which is what I try and help investors, especially Singapore-based companies, to understand and to appreciate one doing business in Indonesia. I've also founded the Indonesia Economic Forum, which is a multi-stakeholder platform where I bring government, I bring private sector, I bring civil society together to really discuss some of the challenges facing Indonesia in the coming years, and more importantly, also to find some solutions to those challenges from a broad perspective, not just from the government perspective. I think when companies do business in Indonesia, the one thing that they really have to appreciate is that Indonesia is very much a private sector driven economy. The government plays a role, but it does not play a central role as, for example, the Singapore government plays within the Indonesian economy. So I think that's an important perspective to understand. So having a good perspective and how things fit together is very critical to succeeding in doing business in Indonesia. I'll hand it back to you, Sham, and I look forward to receiving some questions and having a very engaging debate with our participants.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pak Shoeb. Okay, we're over to Pak Andrew to start the presentation.
Okay.
Pak Andrew, please share your slide.
Yes, I We'll need you to exit first. Okay. Okay, is this clear?
Okay, it's good.
Okay, let me. Okay, so this is a slight introduction about our firm. I think Ibu Angeline has already kindly introduced herself and also myself in it just now. So let me just let us go straight into this seminar, all right? So basically today, it is a summary of doing business in Indonesia. Of course, first and foremost, I will help give some insight on, what are the impact of COVID-19 and also the omnibus law, all right, the long-awaited omnibus law, and also how to enter the Indonesian market, all right, and also how, in terms of the framework, how to fit within the legal framework to make your Indonesian operations a success. And as part of that, what are the topics, all right, that investors will face when running the business, and also the common legal pitfalls and how to avoid the same, and also some case studies. So basically, pretty much this seminar is aimed to, providing confidence to the Singaporean investors investing in Indonesia and how to make it work and be successful in it. Okay, so in terms of COVID-19, in the interest of time, I will not be reading every slide in detail. I'll just touch on the main points. But of course, these slides will be shared with all participants. And then if you have any queries, we can always discuss separately. Now, in terms of COVID-19, the government lately has introduced the so-called PSBB, which is the big scale social distancing, pembatasan sosial berskala besar. Okay, so in this PSBB is somewhat similar to what you have your circuit breaker in Singapore. So basically it's meant to, the government actually ask non-essential businesses to close, and also to actually move to the extent to actually temporarily ban foreign nationals from entering Indonesia. Of course, there are certain exceptions to it. Okay, now, in terms of COVID-19, we do see a lot of, inquiries from existing clients regarding whether this will trigger the force majeure clause. Now, it all depends on the wordings of the force majeure clause in the contract itself, but in most of the cases, it is possible. Now, on this topic, I would like to thank SBF again and for allowing us to share this. And also we want to allow an opportunity for Singaporean companies who have businesses in Indonesia. And if you are affected by this COVID-19 situation and would like to explore, raising force majeure, then we will be happy to have a complimentary, clinic session after this seminar. Okay, so with regards to employees, all right, this is another hot topic because in the Indonesian manpower law perspective, the employees are, the law is actually very much pro-employee. But however, all right, the manpower law does not go into detail of how to face this COVID-19 situation. So because of that, what can happen is we can always tell the companies, in this case, our clients, to actually refer back to the Indonesian Civil Code, all right, to actually work out a measure together to face this. And the important thing is we need to get the understanding. So this is where the Indonesian culture comes in. We need to get a joint mutual understanding for the greater good. So in a sense, that is why we need to adopt a, us versus COVID-19 rather than an employee versus employer, which is the normal situation. Okay, and whatever measures that has been agreed upon, it is very important to document it in writing. Okay, then of course, in terms of the fiscal incentives measures, rolled out by the Indonesian government, so they are still rolling out as of now, but the most important one right now for the employees would be actually the income tax. Okay, so they've given some waivers, okay, for certain salary below 200 million, and of course they are also providing cash assistance to some members of the public. Now, in this respect, this is important because ultimately, at the end of the day, we will need to make sure that society we face this together. So I think the Indonesian government, as we speak now, I expect them to be rolling out more incentives and more packages to actually help alleviate the impact of the COVID-19 on businesses. Then the next important point, which I see right now, is because of this big scale social distancing, people aren't able to come together to meet. So that's why we've started to see the use of e-signatures. So under the Indonesian law, though it is not widely used because Indonesia is still very much a wet signature industry, but it is generally accepted. Okay, so it is possible to still do business using e-signature in Indonesia. Okay, now this omnibus law is a very long-awaited law, all right, that investors want it to be passed as soon as possible. So basically what happens is sometimes because, in the past, investors do have a, if I dare say, slightly wrong image of investing in Indonesia, because sometimes the perspective, they hear that Indonesia is difficult, it's complicated. So what the government plans to do, and this is led by President Jokowi, is that his aim for this omnibus law is to address all these so-called negative elements, and then to make it more investor friendly. So as you can see, tax reforms, manpower laws, environmental standards, licenses, these are all the main red issues which, in terms of the quote unquote negative side of investing in Indonesia. So the president aims to address all this in one law, and hopefully with the passing of this law, then, it will be easier to do business in Indonesia, and then hopefully with that, then we will attract more foreign investors to invest here. Now, the one point about this law is it was introduced late last year, then deliberation was early this year, but due to the COVID-19 situation, we expected, it would not be passed by May, all right? That was the initial timeline. So, but rest assured that the Indonesian government, they are still looking into this as one of their priorities despite the COVID-19 situation, and they will hope to pass it as soon as possible. Okay. Now, so this is how you can enter the Indonesian market. So basically there are 5 main options for you to choose from. Okay, the first 3 will be direct investment into Indonesia, where the last 2 will be you invest from Singapore. Okay, so in terms of the rep office, okay, the rep office is the fastest and the, in a sense, cheapest way to enter, because there is no investment commitment, there's no paid up capital. So you just have a presence in Indonesia. Now, the importance about the rep office is because sometimes in the Indonesian culture, all right, people when doing business with a foreign party, they prefer to see a Indonesian address. All right, to some extent, that also shows your commitment. All right, so in this case, a rep office is actually the easiest way. You can be based in a virtual office, so you don't need to actually have a physical office here. Okay, but the downside of the rep office would be that the rep office cannot issue invoice. So in a sense, all invoices will have to be issued from your company in Singapore. So I will, of course, go into detail about the transition between rep office and PMA at a later slide. So, but in this, for the time being, rep office, important thing is just doing marketing and of course, promotion services. So it's a very efficient way to enter the Indonesian market. Okay, now the PMA company. Now PMA company stands for Penanam Modal Asing, which is a foreign investment company. So this PMA company is a full-fledged private limited company under Indonesian law. Okay, the PMA means that you have foreign shareholders inside. So when it comes to foreign shareholders, you have to, of course, consider the various items such as the negative list and whether there are compliance issues. So in a sense, the foreign investment company allows you to do business here, but in terms of compliance, it will be more heavy in a sense. Okay. Now, these are some of the FAQs that we have for a foreign investment company. So I'll just take the opportunity to answer it directly. So basically, how long it takes about 2 weeks, all right, to incorporate. It's a way improvement, much improvement from Ibu Angeline's time in the 80s, where it took 3 years, okay? So the next one is, what is the minimum amount of capital, all right, that has to be injected in the PMA company? So the amount is 2.5 billion rupiah, okay, which I will elaborate later on. Okay, so whether a PMA company can be registered at the virtual office? The answer is yes, it can be registered and even operate from a virtual office for cost efficiency purpose. So can all members of the BOD and BOC be foreign nationals? The answer is yes. It's just that such foreigners cannot hold any HR related portfolios. All right. So real estate, I get a lot of questions whether I want to buy Indonesian properties, because they're attractive pricing and good prospect. So the answer is yes, you can buy, but unfortunately you have to buy through a PMA company. So a Singapore company cannot own assets in Singapore, all right, in Indonesia, sorry. It has to be done via a PMA company, which can be 100% foreign owned, which we will show in subsequent slides. Okay, the others will be, are there any statutory reserves? Yes, it will be 20% of your paid up capital. Foreign exchange controls, no, the rupiah is freely traded. Then can a Singapore company employ a person to work in Indonesia? The answer is yes and no, because we do often see that, before the company actually commits to an investment, they want to hire an Indonesian consultant to test the market. So there are ways to do that, but not under employer-employee relationship, but rather independent contractual relationship, which I will elaborate later on. Okay, so joint venture, the important thing is you need to ask, right, is it optional or is it mandatory? In terms of mandatory is you need to see the negative list, which I will explain in later slides. So the pros and cons, all right? Like for example, if it is an optional item, then you need to see what are the strengths brought in by your partner. All right, of course, in terms of partner, you have to understand and know who they are. So that is why, sometimes we suggest that you do a pre-acquisition or, some sort of due diligence to understand. So in a sense, to put it, for lack of a better way to put it, is like getting married, dating is easy, getting married is easy, but, when it comes to divorce, it's always painful. So it's always important to know who you are going to be dealing with and partnering with in the long term. Okay, so appointing distributors, all right? So appointing distributors, you can do so from Singapore. This is the easiest way to start to have a Indonesian operation, an arm in the Indonesian market, but without setting up your own presence here. So appointing distributors. So appointing distributors, again, the same thing. You want to conduct due diligence. You want to make sure that you appoint the right distributor and that he or she has the strength and capability to distribute your product, because sometimes we see that in our clients' cases, when you appoint a wrong distributor, then that is where things can spiral out of control. And the important thing about distribution agreement that I've often been a case, we see that, the clients will use Singapore law and, Singapore courts under distribution agreement. Distribution is actually regulated in Indonesia. So it's important to ensure that your distribution agreement is actually compliant with Indonesian law. Though you can use Singapore law, but make sure that, the basic requirements under Indonesian law are met. Okay. So franchising. Franchising, similar to distribution, is a way for you to enter the Indonesian market without actually setting up a presence here. The important thing about franchise is many a times we often see that, the Singapore companies will use franchise and they will use their own franchise agreements to come into and enter the Indonesian market. Now, that is actually a common mistake that we see, because actually Indonesian law does regulate franchise in detail. Okay, so we got to make sure that, before the Singapore company can be legally called a franchisor under Indonesian laws, such compliance has been complied with. Okay, now, because sometimes, when often the case, franchising, the government does post some high, so-called quote-unquote high standards, all right, to be classified as a franchisor. So we do often get the question, okay, if I can't do franchise, what can I do? There we go. We have licensing as an alternative. Okay, so the important thing is it's not so simple as you can just call, oh, we change franchising to licensing. That's not how it works. So basically, in a licensing arrangement, is you license the IPR, and also you can supplement it with a technical assistance agreement. So in a sense, licensing, I would say, is much more liberal because current laws does not impose a strict requirement, okay, on what can be called, what is a licensor under Indonesian law. So they don't impose that. So in a sense, the parties are free to decide, all right, on this licensing agreement. And then of course, the license agreement will need to be registered as part of compliance to the Ministry of Law and Human Rights. Okay, so the OSS compliance. this is something which is very new, rolled out over the past couple of years by the President Jokowi. So it is aimed to be, in your case, in Singapore's case, with your ACRA, okay? Sorry, the microphone dropped. Okay, it will be your ACRA, okay? So it's aimed to centralize efficiency, all right? It's a reaction to the investor feedback, okay? Because the rationale was, before this, everything was, all the foreign companies, all their licenses and permits are processed by BKPM. Of course, I respect my fellow friends and colleagues at BKPM, but sometimes, you know, due to the sheer volume of work, you know, and also the bureaucracy level, you know, permits may take some time to obtain. So what happens is, previously, you have to fulfill 1,001 things, then you go and apply, right? So sometimes fulfilling 1,001 things may take time, right? Because sometimes you know, under Indonesian law, there may be certain requirements, technical inspections and stuff. So what happens is, President Jokowi decided to say, okay, I will give you the permit now, but you fulfill the requirements later. So which is actually quite positive, because actually if the systems are all online, then the licenses can be obtained within 1 day, which is very, very helpful when we do have to meet certain compliance deadlines. Okay, so other basic compliance, okay, you have, I believe this is the same as your Singapore Companies Act, your EGM, AGM, you know, share certificates. And the important thing here is that somewhat different from your Singapore side, the company side, is that you do not have to fill in the LKPM report. Now, this LKPM report is the investment activities reports, okay, which needs to be filed to BKPM every 3 months. Okay, of course, you have your BPJS, which is your, in Singapore, your CPF equivalent. And also, of course, importantly, nowadays moving forward is the tax compliant, because Indonesian tax office, they are getting more robust and the officials are also better trained. So they are, in a sense, more to the book, and it's very important to have compliance at the early stage to avoid issues in future. Okay, so other matters is like, for example, if you are in a manufacturing industry, you may want to consider where is your location of your project, your factory, what is your basic wages if you are a labor-intensive industry, and whether infrastructure available if you need things like electricity, water, roads. So all this, Indonesia, it's a very big country. Okay, so every location will have its own pros and cons, and of course we'll be happy to discuss which is the optimum location for your designated business plan. Okay, now, so these are the legal framework. Okay, so when it comes to investing in Indonesia, you will be dealing, all right, with all these basic regulations. Okay, of course, this is not exhaustive, but these are the main regulations that you'll be dealing with when investing here. Okay, let me take some time to explain this. Right, very often we do hear, you know, some investors having different understanding. Okay, if I dare say, wrong understanding of what is the investment amount and paid up capital amount. Okay. So when in terms of paid up capital amount, it is actually rupiah 2.5 billion rupiah. So in a sense, now it will be slightly less than 250K 250,000 Sing dollars. Okay, so this is the paid up capital. The investment amount is different from the paid up capital. The investment amount needs to be more than rupiah 10 billion, which is approximately slightly less than 1 million Singapore dollars. All right, and this investment amount is actually a commitment during the incorporation stage that you will expand or realize within 1 to 3 years, depending on your business model. Okay, so it's 2.5 billion as paid up capital, and this 2.5 billion can be used for any purpose as long as it's related to your business. It's fine. Pay rent, pay salary, invest in the property. It's fine. Okay, so in terms of other important considerations, other than the divestment requirement only comes in if you were to purchase a very, very old PMA company, all right, you know, back in the 90s or 80s, where, you know, certain companies, they do have this divestment requirement. If you are investing new, then there should be no divestment requirement, unless you are in a specific sector, such as a mining sector, where, you know, there's a gradual divestment requirement throughout the period. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is the negative list was I was talking about, the how the KBLI number plays into this and how it affects your companies, and especially the ownership of shares, all right, by the Singapore company. So this KBLI is a set of business activities, okay, that is written out, all right, by the Indonesian government, and the Indonesian government in 2016 decided to plug some of these so-called classification codes and put it in a list. And then in the list, they impose whether you are open or whether you are closed or open with conditions. All right. So for example, like what we have right now, of course, many of the business activities are actually 100% open. It's just that as long as your business activity does not fall within this list, okay, then it's 100% open. Like for example, we have F&B restaurants, right? You can 100% open, trading 100% open, manufacturing 100% open. So some of the restrictions are like this, okay? Like for example, warehousing 67%, oil and gas 49%. So it really depends on what you're doing, and we need to identify this. So this will help you identify whether is it a mandatory for you to have a partner or is it an optional item, okay? So again, these are some examples, all right, that are open. So coming back to the omnibus law, the president actually wants to amend this list. Instead of calling a negative list, which has quote unquote negative connotations, they want to create the investment whitelist. Okay, so what is the difference between the investment whitelist and this negative list? So the investment whitelist will actually contain a list of business that are 100% open. So as long as you fall within that, is 100% open. But the thing is, until that whitelist has been passed, the negative list, this 2016 list, will still be in effect, though it is time for a change. Okay, so these are for example, some of the negative list which states that the line of business is closed. So for these closed matters, you are unable to invest here, and you will need to find an Indonesian partner here to help you run this. Okay, and as to how you can find your partner, of course, we'll be happy to discuss separately. Okay, in the Indonesian company law, these are the main organs that you have. So basically, these company law organs are separate, all right, independent of each other, and they do act as checks and balances. All right. So of course, in terms of board of directors, you have what you have in Singapore. Now, board of commissioners is something unique to this civil law system. In Singapore, your common law system, I would say that it's probably your chairman, if I dare say. So in a sense, the board of commissioners, they do not have executive powers, but what they do is that they actually monitor and supervise the board of directors. So in a sense, it's a checks and balances. Now, why is this important? It's because, okay, if you have 100% owned, it's all your people, okay, then that's fine, all right? But of course, when you do enter into a joint venture with your Indonesian partner, it's important to decide who will nominate who in the boards, because that in a sense will be checks and balances. And it's like any tactic, when it comes to if in the unfortunate event where where things communication will break down, then all this will play a very important role in how to resolve any disputes and how to leverage on it, right, to get a desired outcome. Okay, so the Indonesian Civil Code, now, because Indonesian is a civil law country, so they practice a lot of codification. All right, so it's very, very different from your common law, which is actually, they call it judge-made law. This is a lot of codification here. So in a sense, the important points of the civil code is, the principle of good faith, all right, I think, which is mirroring the common law principle of equity, okay. So ultimately, end of the day, Indonesian courts, even though it is, it's not bound by, judicial precedent, but they do place a lot of emphasis on good faith. Okay, then when operating your company in Indonesia, you will be facing certain issues such as manpower, real estate. Probably you want to think about e-commerce and also the telecommunications and of course manufacturing issues. So in terms of manpower, okay. Very often, we see that, the companies would like to use their own Singapore employment contract template and just, copy and paste it here. Unfortunately, this is not actually advisable because under Indonesian manpower law, manpower is actually heavily regulated, and there are certain requirements, for, the contents of the employment contract will need to be compliant with the Indonesian manpower law. So of course, you have to, of course, on one case, you want to adapt as much of your Singapore policies into your Indonesian office for uniformity's sake. That is possible. We've done many cases before for our clients. What we did is we just kept whatever that is possible under Indonesian law, and so that you can have uniformity across the board, but at the same time being compliant with Indonesian manpower law. Okay, the important thing I want to raise here is the termination of employment. Actually, this is the most infamous point, which also coincidentally is also regulated in the omnibus law. Okay, so termination of employment here is very different. There are ways to deal with it from the Indonesian culture perspective. Okay, so I know in Singapore, your Singapore Manpower Act is very pro-employer, but here is pro-employee. So in most cases of termination, please expect that there may be some termination compensation payable as part of the termination deal. Okay, that is a formula prescribed. Of course, we'll be happy to discuss the formula with you separately. In minimum wage, again, so every city or province has their own minimum wage. So you may, even in regencies within the province have their own different minimum wage. So you may wish to take into consideration where you want to place your company, and also make sure that you do not breach this minimum wage provision. Okay. In terms of expatriates, okay, so expatriates, when every foreigner comes into Indonesia for non-leisure purpose, business purpose, please do not come here using a tourist visa. All right, we have seen often the case where the foreigner comes in with a tourist visa, they attend meetings, and unfortunately there was an inspection that happened that day. Then that is where the foreigner would then be called to the immigration office and then questioned. So please come in here with a business visa. All right, it's not difficult to get, it's fast to get, and it's also safer, okay, especially if you're entering here long term, all right, frequently on a long term basis. Then in terms of work permits, you will only require it if you are working here, okay, but note that if you're working here, then that also makes you a tax resident here, which means you need to ensure that the personal tax compliance side are also covered, okay. In terms of work permits, of course, there will be certain fees payable to the government. The major fee would be the DPKK, all right, which is on the formula is $100 per person per month. So if one person wants to apply for a 1 year working visa, then it's $1,200. Okay. All right, real estate. This is so certain companies, when they start to make money, they want to buy property here. So and buying property here in Indonesia is quite tricky in a sense that first and foremost, there are many land title rights. Okay, so the most common one for foreigners would be the HGB, the right to build. Okay, the reason is because freehold, okay, is only for Indonesian citizens like me. Okay, so for foreigners, you can invest through the PMA company, like I mentioned previously, but under a HGB title. All right, even though it's 80 years, all right, it's maximum 80 years, but under the current agrarian law, it's split between 30, 20, and 30. So the question is, what happens after the 80 years? Now, in theory, it has not happened yet, all right, but if you go back to the agrarian law, it means it goes back to the state. After the 80 years, it goes back to the state, and then the company or the landowner can reapply for another 30 years to kickstart the whole mechanism again. All right. Now, then if you want to own it in your own personal name, like for example, if you have a villa in Bali that you want to buy, you can do so under a hak pakai title. Now, hak pakai is slightly different from HGB. It has a lesser tenure, but in a sense, it can be owned by a foreign individual. Another one is the strata title. If you are purchasing apartments or office units, then strata title will be available. Strata title, again, is regulated and it's on its own. We need to check the land title because this strata title is based on one of these titles. So in a sense, buying strata title means you have to do due diligence on both levels. The strata title level and the underlying land title, which is most likely in the case HGB. Sorry. Okay. In terms of land title searches before you actually buy a property, all right, unfortunately, Indonesia is not yet, the searches are not digitalized. In a sense, it's still very much manual. So we have to go to the actual land office to actually do the search. But Indonesian, the government, they are actually pushing towards the digitalization of all the land title certificates in Indonesia, but I think it may take quite some time to achieve. But nevertheless, the Indonesian government, they are actually pushing towards that direction. All right, e-commerce. So e-commerce is a growing thing in Indonesia. Okay, the economists predict that the Indonesian e-commerce market will grow in the coming years. So because basically Indonesia has a huge domestic population, all right, and so with that, then that's where the perspective lies. So for e-commerce, we need to differentiate, all right, between the marketplace and non-marketplace platform. If it's just a basic e-commerce, it can be 100% foreign owned. But if it's a marketplace platform, all right, now there we go. A marketplace platform, then for you to be 100% open, you need to have an investment amount of more than 100 billion. Okay, so in terms of IT, there are data protection regulations here. Of course, it's not as robust as your PDPA in Singapore, right, but there is. And also another requirement is to have the data center placed in Indonesia. Of course, there are certain exceptions to that, but just take note that on a long-term basis, you may wish to reconsider relocating your servers here. Okay. So in terms of manufacturing, again, you may wish to consider the location, and also whether it's an industrial park, it's a private property, the pros and cons, and also the local area, the culture around within the surrounding areas, because that will affect your CSR, and also your manpower law, how the basic minimum wage will determine which part of Indonesia do you set up your factory at. Okay, so for avoiding legal pitfalls, I will pass the time to Angeline. She will share her experience, and hopefully her experience will help you gain a better insight on how to avoid the mistakes of other people. Angeline, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Now, Indonesia abounds in opportunities. There's no doubt about that. So once you have identified a good business or investment opportunity, it's very important that you do it right from the beginning. Now, I'm going to illustrate via 3 examples why it is so important to do legal due diligence when it comes to acquisition or investment in Indonesian companies. Now, what I would like to highlight right from the start is that Indonesian matters are never simple and straightforward. Okay, so the first example I'd like to share with you is that is the case of an acquisition of an Indonesian company by a Singapore client. So the vendor kept telling our client that my company is very clean, okay? And the vendor requested for $500,000 Sing dollars to be paid as deposit, non-refundable deposit. Then of course our advice to the client is that, hey, wait a minute, better, let us do some checking first. And lo and behold, when we do legal due diligence and the exercise reviews rather adverse results, in the sense that quite a number of important licenses are missing. Okay, so remember, never make a payment of a significant amount of deposit unless we have gone past the LDD stage and the results are satisfactory. Then another example is in the case of a distressed asset sale. Is a nickel mine, and because it's being sold at a lower price, so the vendor requested for quite a high amount of deposit, again non-refundable, 20%. But at the end of the day, we negotiated for a lower percentage, and then to be actually put into escrow account pending the completion of LDD exercise, and also, of course, financial due diligence. And the third example I would like to share with you is that our client was investing in a factory with which owns various plots of land, and then we conducted legal due diligence not only on the company, the contracts, but also, of course, on the land. As Andrew was mentioning earlier on, we had to go to the relevant province and then conduct the land search manually. And we discovered that among the various plots of land, a few plots were actually not yet in the name of the company. And so what happened is we have to rectify it as a matter of urgency, and the client, the parties still want to proceed, with the investment and with the completion. So what we did was, client withheld a certain percentage of the purchase consideration which will only be paid when the land title certificate is issued in the name of the target company. Okay, so the important lesson to learn is be careful and don't make any significant amount of deposit pending LDD results. Now, what happens if there are irregularities? Well, just rectify. And then for those which are not so important, we can have them as conditions subsequent. Okay. Now then, the next point I'd like to share with you is that it's very important to comply with Indonesian law. Now, times have changed, really changed, you know, ever since the time, you know, I was with Baker McKenzie back in the 80s, Indonesia is now moving towards more and more corporate governance, and it really is important to comply with Indonesian law. Independent legal advice should always be sought because in Indonesia, there's a lot of hearsay, okay, what they call best market practice. You know, this is Indonesia and we do it this way. We have to be very careful because the fact that everybody else is doing it does not mean that it is the legal way, and it just means that a lot of people are doing it wrongly. And there will be a price, you know, for not complying with Indonesian law. It ranges from, administrative warning or even, you know, possible revocation or suspension of investment license, and to certain, in extreme cases, it could have criminal consequences. So what are the examples of, you know, very common hearsay or things which are actually not right, but a lot of people hold that view? First and foremost is that in the case of 100% foreign-owned PMA company, sometimes clients have heard that, oh, it is a must, okay, it is necessary for you to have a local director or a local shareholder. So as Andrew has explained earlier on, that is actually a myth. It's not true. Okay, another common point is that, oh, you know, we can do business without having the requisite licenses. We've actually seen cases whereby restaurants operate without a restaurant license, and some people thought that it is okay. Then of course the answer is it's not. And we've assisted Singapore company to sort of regularize its Indonesian operations by restructuring its franchise operations into a legitimate licensing structure because they couldn't fulfill the franchise law regulations, and the local franchise law happened to have the view that, oh, it doesn't really matter, we can still operate. Well, I mean, in that particular case, the Singapore company is going for IPO. Then, of course, you know, we need to rectify the irregularities so that we can issue, at the end of the day, a clean legal opinion for the successful listing of the Singapore clients. Okay, so the next point I would like to share with you is that, you know, avoid mismatch of expectations between partners, okay? Proper documentation should be put in place from day one. It's very important. Now, day one during the initial stage is the honeymoon period. And then everybody is so happy, so excited about, you know, the project and the prospects of making lots and lots of money. So it's a lot easier, you know, for the parties to come to terms of the legal documentation during this honeymoon stage. And we have represented, you know, many Singapore companies, who, you know, in relation to certain dispute cases, or when they share a slightly different view from the Indonesian partners. And then when we have to advise them on their legal rights under Indonesian law, it's very challenging if you don't have a properly drafted, for example, a joint venture or shareholders in joint venture agreement. Okay. So it's very important, you know, to have a proper documentation from day one, and try not to do business just to base on trust and gentleman's understanding. Of course, trust is inherent and it's fundamental, but you just have to document it in writing. Okay. Now, next is the importance of IPR protection. I've actually have a case study later on, which I will share more. But here I just want to highlight that unfortunately there are certain unconscionable people out there, and they love to register famous Singapore brands, and of course, you know, brands from other countries. And then after that, you know, they will sit there and wait for you to contact them. if you want to expand into the Indonesian market, to either buy them out, at a price, of course, or they will oppose your trademark application. So it's very important if you are interested in the Indonesian market and you have a valuable trademark, register it from day one. Okay. Then next will be the prohibited nominee and trust structure. I just want to say a few words on this. Under the 2007 Investment Law, Article 33, it is not possible for an Indonesian individual or company to state that the Indonesian entity or the party is holding shares in an Indonesian company, for and on behalf or on trust for the foreigner. And this is particularly relevant in the case where the line of business is not 100% open to foreign direct investment. For example, the distribution is only up to 67%, right? Okay, so this statement is actually void and unenforceable. Common market practice, you have heard about probably, nominee arrangement, but just take note that, it's not enforceable. And the same goes for land, there are villas in Bali, hard milik land, so they get an Indonesian individual to actually hold it for them on behalf of the foreigner, and it's very risky. This is a very risky structure, and even though there could have been loan agreement or a mortgage over the land, but if the loan agreement is not valid, then of course the mortgage goes without saying, being a supporting document, a collateral, will also not be enforceable, because the whole transaction can be viewed as a sham to circumvent applicable Indonesian law, and therefore it will not be enforceable based on public policy grounds, even though land is not directly covered by the investment law, because the investment law Article 33 only talks about shares. Right. So next, I would like to have a quick word on this new Ministry of Law regulation. It's passed last year and is implemented not too long ago. Basically, directors of a company will have to make a declaration to confirm who are the beneficial owners of that company. And of course, this will have implications on the nominee structure. Who do you declare to be the beneficial owner? Is it a foreign company? Then, of course, you will run foul of a negative list, etc. There could be penalties. And then, if you declare that the Indonesian entity is the beneficial owner, is also not correct and could constitute a misrepresentation to the authorities. Okay, next. A quick word on the language, right? This is very important practical point, but often overlooked, but it has very serious consequence, because if you enter into a contract with an Indonesian party, but it's only written in English, then the agreement is unenforceable, okay? So it's very important to have bilingual. The law provides that if one of the contracting parties is a foreigner, then the contract can also be written in a foreign language, which in most cases is English, and also it can be Chinese. But from the contractual perspective, we can make it very clearly in the contract that the English version will prevail in the event of inconsistency or contradiction. Okay, so this is very important. And next, a quick word on the use of rupiah currency. Generally, for commercial transactions, the consideration should be denominated in rupiah, although it can be tied to a foreign equivalent, but it has to be stated in rupiah. And last point, under this avoiding common legal pitfall topic, is spousal consent requirement. Okay, you will be wondering, what is this? Okay, so Indonesian, because of the communal property law, a spouse has a 50% interest in the assets of the other spouse. So the husband has a 50% interest in the assets of the wife, and vice versa. So what does it mean? It means that if you are dealing with a person, individual who is married, and if you are entering into a sale and purchase agreement, lease agreement, a personal guarantee, transfer of shares agreement, transfer of land agreement with that person, you have to get the spouse to actually countersign, to consent, okay? Because otherwise, in future, the spouse may raise an objection to say that, A, this transaction or this transfer of shares is not valid because I, being the spouse, I have not consented to it. So this is a very important practical issue. So very often, in my practice, then my clients will ask me, hey, Ibu Angeline, which spouse to ask? Okay, anyway, it's just a joke. Right. Next, I think I will want to, share with you some case studies. I'll be doing a few case studies first, and then I will pass it to Andrew to continue to share the other case studies with you. Now, first, as Andrew mentioned, we have the negative list in Indonesia. Okay, so you have seen earlier on that trading, import-export is actually open to 100% foreign direct investment, whereas distribution is only 67%. So look at this chart, okay? If you look at it, and you see at the left-hand side, the PMA Company 1, the Foreign Investment Company 1, is in the line of trading business, and it can be 100% owned by foreign shareholders. Now, why do we have two companies? It's because under Indonesian company law, each company must have at least two shareholders, okay? So we help the client structure this transaction so that PMA Company 1 will be in the line of business of trading 100% foreign owned. And then, but the client would want to sell to end users, right? Trading company can only sell to wholesaler and distributor, okay? It cannot sell to end users. In other words, the factories direct, right? For example. So what we have here is that we set up two PMA companies, one trading, the other one is distribution. And then distribution, the Singapore company can own 67%, right? Then there's another Indonesian partner owning the balance 33%. And this PMA Company 2, which is in the distribution line of business, can sell directly to end users. Now, so in this case, the importer is the PMA Company 1. So the PMA Company 1 import the products and then sell to others, wholesalers and distributors, and at the same time sell to its own affiliate, PMA Company 2. And then we try to maximize profits at the PMA Company 1 level. And of course, we work very closely with tax advisors to make sure it's tax efficient, right? Okay, so the next case study is about acquisition of an Indonesian company, right? So this transaction sort of like has to be done by yesterday. Okay, so we basically rushed for the clients, and we did the LDD, on a very urgent basis. And but unfortunately, we realized that we discovered that certain requisite licenses were not there. So we had to rectify this irregularity on an extremely urgent basis because the parties would want completion to proceed as scheduled. So it's very important, to actually plan ahead, and so that we can, take into account of the due requirements of Indonesian formalities. Because if you acquire a company, there needs to be a 30 days notice period. Because if there's a change in control, then we need a newspaper announcement, and there must be a 30 days lapse between the date when you insert the newspaper and the passing of the shareholders' resolution to approve the transfer, and also, to execute the transfer of shares. Right, we need the 30 days period before the transfer of shares can be executed. Okay, so the next case study is getting back a misappropriated trademark of a Singapore company. And so this is we represented Crystal Jade in Singapore, and I can share about this because it's public information. It's widely reported in the Indonesian newspapers and also Singapore newspaper. So the client helped manage a restaurant in Indonesia, and so when the client wanted to actually invest in Indonesia direct and open up restaurants, then of course it has to register the trademark, right? But then we realized that we discovered that the trademark has actually been registered by another Indonesian company. And the problem is that the Dashcam management agreement doesn't really have a properly drafted IPR protective provisions. And so we have to go to court, and at the end of the day, justice prevailed, and we managed to get back the trademark for the client. So the takeaway is that it's very important, to have a properly drafted license agreement to make it very clearly that the Indonesian company, which is using the trademark, is only a licensee, is only a contractual licensee, and the license is revocable. Okay. Unless, of course, if the Indonesian company using the trademark is your own subsidiary. Yeah. So the next case study will basically, I think for this one, I will pass it to Andrew, to share with you. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's me again. So this case study is talking about the manufacturing and asset ownership. So in such a case, all right, I'll show an example. All right, hold on, sorry. Okay, so we have these two companies here, all right, and now I'll go back to the first page. So having that in mind, all right, the reason is because we want to avoid placing all eggs in a single basket. Okay, so come back to this. So okay, if you have, it's okay, in theory, under the law, it's possible to have a PMA company, one owning the land to also operate the toy factory. Okay, but of course, we choose to separate it out, okay, because, especially if it's a labor intensive industry, we want to avoid, exposure to the extent possible under the law. So that is why we try to separate out the asset and also in terms of the actual operations itself. So of course, in this case, you can have 100%, of course, both is 100% open. You need to have two shareholders, like what Ibu Angeline mentioned. Now, in terms of the agreements here, I would like to take some time to explain this, is in terms of the agreement, the technical assistance or the licensing agreements, these are agreements, legitimate agreements to actually open a legitimate channel to repatriate funds back to Singapore. So in this case, for example, if you do not go through this, you have to wait till dividends. And of course, dividends is an annual thing, or you can have interim dividends under the law. But then again, it's still interim. It's still subject to what happens at the end of the financial year. Now, in order to legitimately recuperate or, and repatriate funds back, you can always put in place these sort of agreements. Of course, in these agreements, of course, because it's possibly a related party transaction. So that's why we work closely with tax advisors, as Ibu Angeline mentioned, on how to make sure that it's tax and also legally efficient. Okay, now, if I may add, all right, so you have second PMA company one, all right, PMA two here. So for example, if you are a labor intensive industry, all right, in moving forward, of course, for the first 2 years, you will not feel it now, but if moving forward, coming back to what I mentioned about termination of employment. So for one of the major hurdles, all right, in factory or labor-intensive industries is that the liability of the compensation payable, where there's a termination of employment scenario. Now, the important thing to note is the law states that the formula used is based on the last drawn salary. So for example, if you have a staff working with you for 20 years, all right, from day one, he joined you, but at the end of the 20 years, when you terminate the person, you terminate the person using his last drawn salary. But the formula will take into account the entire tenure of their employment period. So in a sense, that is where one of the concerns, all right, of the investors is, so how do I reduce my exposure? Of course, we do work with banks together with our clients to see what they can do, some investment fund or, so that at least if such a thing happens, there's some sort of an emergency fund that's able, that we can tap onto. So in a sense, it's like insurance where we pay, I gotta be careful here. I mean, I'm not trying to promote the banks and stuff, but yeah, it's just we pay, and then, at the end of the day, if we need to draw on that fund, then there is a reserve fund there. Okay. So what happens is, the formula, coming back to the formula is not linear. In a sense, it's not straight up. It actually goes curved. So in a sense, the longer an employee is with you, the higher the compensation amount. Unfortunately, that's how the law is drafted back in 2003 when Megawati passed the law. President Megawati back then passed the law. So how do you so-called quote unquote reduce the exposure? Is we can also set up another PMA company. All right, so to have the workers crisscross So we will find together with the clients, we will work together to find a sweet spot where it is still, we follow the law before we transfer employment between PMA code and PMA 3 or PMA 4, up to you. All right, we can transfer the employment in such a way that every year there will be a compensation payable every 2 years or every 3 years, depending on what is the formula we use, so that it limits the exposure to that particular compensation amount. And of course, with proper planning, the companies can always, calculate, in terms of budgeting. So apart from the annual 13-month bonus, you can also factor in this bonus. All right, it's not a big amount. The wager, the good thing about this is the wager rates in Indonesia, they are competitive in nature. So with proper planning, it's still doable. Okay. So this is how you can separate out, the different companies and use different companies for different purposes to create a scenario where it's healthy in a long-term situation. And, and even in this cross employment so-called scheme, it is still 100% legal because we are still paying compensation to the workers. But of course, in a sense, this compensation becomes a cost, which we will need to factor in. But it's not impossible because we are doing this for some of our clients. Okay, now the next case is regarding the transition, okay, by a technology company. So nowadays, as the world, digitalize and the whole digital economy, I think Pak Shoeb can explain later. So in terms of the digital economy, people actually don't need to be here. Like for example, technology companies, we have many companies in Singapore who are in the tech sector. They can actually service their clients in Indonesia. They don't need to set up an operation here. Okay, but of course, there are advantages for doing so. Okay, so for example, in terms of marketing purpose, like what I mentioned previously, it's all about culture and understanding, and they prefer to see a Indonesian presence. So what happened is they can actually set up an RO for marketing purpose. All right, so then RO you can promote, and when clients engage, all right, the company, it has to be paid to a bank account in Singapore. Now, when business starts to grow, which is a good problem, right? So some clients, all right, we notice is that they prefer to say that I want to pay to an Indonesian account using IDR. Maybe it's for cost purpose. They have their own policy. So that is where the Singapore company will say, okay, we will need to look into setting up a PMA company. So when it comes to PMA company, of course, whatever I've mentioned previously regarding the whole investment capital, paid up capital, it all applies. The good thing about technology companies, 100% open for foreign ownership. So it is not mandatory for you to find a local partner, which saves you a lot of hassle. It's a fast setup. You can set up in the virtual office. You can even take over your rep office virtual lease, so to speak, for cost efficiency's sake. Okay, so the issues for that a company will need to consider is whether you want to keep the RO or where you want to close it. All right. The important thing is when you incorporate a PMA company from a RO, it's not a mere transform. Oh, I am a rep office now. I want to transform, upgrade, or upsize, so to speak, to a PMA company. That's not how it works. So because it's two separate entities altogether. RO is just a rep office of the Singapore company in Indonesia, whereas a PMA company is a full-fledged private limited liability company with a proper incorporated status in Indonesia. Okay, so you want to consider whether you want to close the RO and then you want to set up the PMA. Now, of course, when you set up the PMA, you need to consider the whole process, like the timeline and stuff. When is the transition? So how the transition take place? The staff of the RO, will it novate? Will you absorb the employment, or will you pay a compensation back then and then to start a fresh employment tenure? And also novation of contract. So these are some of the issues which we face when we advise clients on how to do so. So coming back to what Ibu Angeline said, the proper planning is actually important, because in Indonesia, proper planning is important, to consider in order to make a business successful. So with this, I would like to thank SBF, Ibu Angeline and Pak Shoeb, and also Pak Syam, and the participants, of course, for their time and attention. We hope that this seminar, helps shed some light about investing in Indonesia. And also, I would like to, give thanks to God for everything. Please remain healthy. Please practice social distancing. The COVID-19, we're all in this together. and I believe we can all make it together. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, and I'll pass it back to Pak Syam.
Thank you so much, Pak Andrew. Thank you so much, Bu Angeline, for all the presentation that you've done. Okay, we go to Q&A right now. A bit to maybe I go first with Bu Angeline. Yeah. Okay, there's a company which want to set up F&B. What do you think will be the typical cost to set up a legal entity to operate a restaurant in Indonesia? So what do you think, Angeline?
Okay, it actually depends on the scale of the operations, right? So if we're talking about the legal cost, I think Andrew can explain a bit more about that. And then also whether or not it's going to be wholly owned or in the form of a joint venture. So Andrew, you want to go straight to the numbers, please?
Okay, in terms of the costing, okay, of course, you as a PMA company, you have your 2.5 billion paid up capital, and from our experience, the 2.5 billion paid up capital, of course, it depends on what F&B concept you use. Some simple concepts such as a kiosk, selling fast food or even drink, cafe for that matter, it's possible. The 250 billion is possible. Of course, if you have more elaborate restaurant or proper full-fledged luxury restaurant, then you may need some borrowings in this regard.
All right. Go to Pak Shoeb. Pak Shoeb, based on your experience, you have been there for 2 decades, and you are the Exco Council member for Singapore Chamber of Indonesia. I was wondering, what are the opportunities to do business in Indonesia? Maybe you can.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Syam, and thank you for this opportunity. The Singapore Chamber of Commerce Indonesia is a voluntary organization that helps identify opportunities for Singapore-based companies who want to do business in Indonesia. I think in terms of the new sectors that are growing fast in Indonesia, definitely is e-commerce, fintech, anything to do with technology is going to grow by leaps and bounds. And the reason being is that Indonesia in many sectors is underserved. For example, if you look at finance and banking, only 20% of Indonesians have bank accounts, which means the large majority of Indonesians have no bank accounts, which means they are more open to other solutions. And fintech solutions have become very popular. Primarily, one of the reasons for that is the massive use of smartphones. The phone has become the key tool to do business, especially in the e-commerce space. And companies such as OVO, companies such as GoPay become larger than most banks because they collect money and they're able to facilitate distribution. I think fintech is a major industry where Singapore companies can actually play a very big role in helping Indonesia's digital economy grow. The other sectors would include agriculture. Indonesia has large available land, but at the same time, we understand that the production of food, Indonesia still needs to import a lot of food. But on the other hand, Singapore also imports a lot of foodstuffs. There is an opportunity here for Singapore companies, especially using technology in agriculture. Again, the key is technology. It's not the basic industry, but the technology that facilitates growth and facilitates innovation. And Indonesia is a major testing ground for new innovations because it has scale. 260 million people, a $1 trillion economy. It has scale that Singapore does not have for you to test your innovations. So I think those are key. Healthcare, for example, digital health is going to grow by leaps and bounds. So Singapore companies that are innovating in digital health, for example, wearing wearable health products, doing telemedicine, all those sectors I think have huge potential for growth in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, back to regards to fintech. Pak Andrew, what do you think, Pak Andrew? How long does the license need to be registered in terms of doing fintech down there? And OJK and Bank Indonesia, Otoritas Jasa Keuangan, you know, they have a very strict regulation doing the fintech. So what's your thought on that, Ibu Angeline and Pak Andrew?
Yes. So basically, if I may start first. So basically, in terms of fintech, unfortunately, fintech is not as straightforward as the OSS system, where you just apply within 1 day you get. Now, in terms of fintech, what happens is the OJK, in this case, will actually put you through a regulatory sandbox. So there are 2 stages first, all right? The first stage is registration with OJK. You just register, which is the easy side. You fulfill the minimum requirements, and then you can register. That's the easy side. Now, the more challenging side is the regulatory sandbox, where they will actually put the so-called business plan and the company through a test, a simulated test, and find faults, okay, to see any defects. And of course, if there are defects, of course, the companies will then be given a chance to rectify it. So in terms of timeline, this regulatory sandbox easily takes up to 6 months, and it can be extended if necessary. Now, the reason for this regulatory sandbox, I'm not trying to villainize the Indonesian officials, no,
Okay,
definitely not. Okay, but they are actually looking towards a consumer protection point of view. So if the company looks at this from this angle, it's not to say that, oh, Indonesia is slow, you know, government's slow, they do things slow, you know. It's not really slow. I would prefer to use the word careful in a sense, right? Careful, okay. So that they actually want to protect the long-term consumer. Of course, this becomes a gray area, you know, in terms of whether you're slow or careful, you can use it interchangeably. But ultimately, end of the day, the spirit of the regulation is pretty much on the protection of consumers, because you know, I just cite, for example, a fintech case, a P2P lending. There's a lot of illegal P2P lending in Indonesia. Of course, some of them from, you know, Northern Asia. I wouldn't mention the country. So as a result of which, you know, sometimes the authorities, they do adopt a more prudent approach on how to, whether they finally give the license. Because when they give a license, the name of the company will actually be stated in the OJK's list of approved fintech providers.
All right.
So when your name is listed there, so OJK, in a sense, feels responsible for that, right? So that is why, you know, the time taken for them to actually review the entire business plan and the entire operation to make sure that when it's launched in the market, all right, it's 100% workable, and it's also protecting, you know, the consumers, all right? Because you must understand that Indonesian consumers they may not be as educated as Singapore, especially if you're going to rural areas. All right, so in a sense, they want to avoid, you know, unscrupulous, you know, investors trying to, you know, find the easy way to make a quick buck, you know, and you know, so-called using all these loopholes to do so. So they are very cautious in this sense, but of course, moving forward, as Indonesian economy, like what Pak Shoeb said, it's going to, you know, boom. So I'm sure the consumer intelligence will also rise, and because of that, hopefully, you know, OJK can also appreciate from that point of view. But until then, it's still going to take some time for that to take place.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. There's a lot of questions. It's overwhelming, actually. So I just go to the next one. In regards to tourism, I know in the COVID-19 current situation is not doing well. Tourism is affected quite badly. But surprisingly, in Bali, the death rate of COVID-19 is only 4, and even the governor is thinking to open up again for Bali. So my question is this. For tourism, is it possible to have ownership of 100% in Indonesia? Bu Angeline.
Right. Okay, so I will take this, thank you, Basham. I will take this together with Andrew. So for tourism, I think we can divide into different sectors, right? So primarily, I think it will be in the hotels, right? So Andrew, maybe you can explain further the differentiation between the 5-star, 4-star, or the all-star.
Yes, so tourism is actually one of the, you know, a push from the President Jokowi in terms of attracting foreign investors. He's actually pushing for not only Bali to create 10 new Balis, right? So tourism is very much a priority sector, of course. I mean, right now, COVID-19 is taking a huge hit. So basically, in terms of tourism, you are actually many of the line of business actually 100% open. All right. So, for example, ranging from hotels to restaurants, and even you know, 4-star hotels are actually open. 3-star hotels are open. Of course, 2-star and 1-star, they are actually open, but with there need to be some local partnership, but that's where the mandatory local partner comes in. But apart from that, from our experience, most of the investors actually, they all have a sizable investment. So in a sense, from the Indonesian government point of things, they are actually viewing and welcoming investors, because investors coming in with these big ideas or big investments, they are not competing with the Indonesian small players, so to speak, small players. So in a sense, that's why tourism sector is very much liberated. All right, in the past, F&B is not open or open with conditions. Now it's actually totally open, and we expect and hope, fingers crossed, that in the new negative list or the white list, we call it, it will remain this case, or if not, even more open. Even 1 star can be open. Because because the thing is, Indonesian, of course, Pak Shoeb can also please feel free to add, the Indonesian, the domestic investment is actually not enough, and they actually rely much on foreign investment in this case. Now, of course, with COVID-19 happening there, of course, there are many opportunities. Maybe perhaps there are opportunities available now, when in terms of investing a property, you can get it at an attractive price, possibly. Right now, the Indonesian government has not issued any regulations expressly to address, to address this point of, investors, taking advantage of this to getting a good bargain. So, if there are such deals, then of course we'll be happy to help invest. And actually, we're also talking to some potential investors who are actually investing, in certain business areas, other than their own traditional business model, to try to diversify and try to take advantage of this situation to expand their business portfolio.
Okay, that's good. A part of talking about tourism, Pak Shoeb, back to you, Pak Shoeb. You are in the media industry for so long. I mean, for Singapore company to get to promote their product and service, what's the best way to do the marketing part? What's the best way to promote their products in Singapore?
Yes, thanks. You mean promoting products in Indonesia, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Traditionally the media industry, of course, has been dominated by the big players, right? Who, what I call corporate media players like TVRI, Kompas Group, where they have they have both print media as well as television media. Now, free-to-air television is still probably the most effective way of promoting a product if you're going mass.
Okay, all
right. The mass market, because I can't remember the percentage, but 80% or 85% of Indonesians watch free-to-air TV. Right, and there are a number of big media players in that line. SCTV, TVRI, Metro TV. Berita Satu. Some are cable, but basically television. But that's very expensive. Yeah, print media is more targeted if you're going after a very targeted market segment. For example, if you are a P2P company, you're targeting businesses rather than the end consumer. Then you would go to print media, especially certain business magazines, which are still quite popular, right? But over the last 5-6 years, what we have seen is a huge growth in social media promotion, using Instagram, using Twitter, using Facebook. Social media promotion has become very, very big, especially for e-commerce companies, right? Because they promote themselves on social media platforms. So it really depends on your target segment. Which market are you targeting? For example, if you look at consumer products, right, whether it's food or whether it's personal hygiene products, they use television because they're reaching millions of people, right? If you look at any of the major television stations, you will find that most of the advertising is consumer durables, right? Biscuits, ABC brand, all those major consumer products, they still go to television because it reaches the broad spectrum of Indonesian consumer society.
All right. Thank you so much, Pak Shoeb. I just want to add further to all of you guys in terms of culture, language. Is it very crucial, to understand them, to be well versed, to be successful in Indonesia when you start your business down there? What's your thought, Angeline, Pak Shoeb, and Pak Andrew? Maybe with Pak Shoeb. Yeah, go Angeline, please.
Yeah, Yeah, I think it's very important because I think it's important to understand the culture, okay, the language, the culture, in order to navigate through the Indonesian, environment. It's to a certain extent, in some aspects, it's quite different from Singapore, whereas Singapore is very straightforward and to the point. Whereas in Java, for example, we have the like wayang kulit, and then the people will be very hesitant to say no. Okay, so maybe Andrew can and Shoeb can add more to that. I'm sure you can share your personal experience.
If I may just jump in, I think having an understanding of. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So I think, just jumping in, I think having an understanding of the Indonesian language is critical to being successful in doing business in Indonesia. It's not because Indonesians do not speak English primarily, but because I think they're very comfortable in expressing themselves in Indonesian. And when you are able to express yourself to your partner, and the partner is able to understand what is the message. As Ibu Angeline says, there are two things that we need to understand about Indonesian culture. They never say no, but they mean no. And secondly, they hate confrontation. So you got to understand that, especially when you're having a contractual discussion on an agreement, you must understand their language, because if you don't, you will get the wrong message, right? So I think in terms of, you don't need to understand like 100% fluent bahasa, but you must be able to at least converse in what we call pasar language, right? At least understand what they are saying, Yeah.
Thank you so much. Next, Pak Andrew, maybe can I ask you another question in regards to back to technology? So it's quite interesting. There's another question asking about edutech. As you mentioned, so there's two questions towards it. As you mentioned, they can run it in Singapore. So is it possible to just have a rep office down there, or we don't need any rep office? And if having a rep office, do we need to open a bank account? Is it mandatory to open a bank account, or is it only for PT, PMR need to have a bank account?
Yes. Okay. So thank you for the question. So I'll address the first element first. Yeah. In terms of edutech, yes, I mean in the technology realm, you can operate from Singapore, but of course, it very much depends on your customers. Are you in the private sector, or are you going to participate with the government, for example, right? So in terms of government, then you must see what are their requirements. So different requirements have different governments have different requirements, and different projects have different requirements. So I mean, if it is probably a more important public project, they may actually ask that Badan Hukum Indonesia. Badan Hukum Indonesia means you will ultimately have to set up this PT company here to participate and to provide such services. Okay, but if it's a private arrangement between the Singapore company and its customer, then technically speaking, you can actually have a rep office. You don't actually need to have a rep office. You can have that done in Singapore. But of course, having a rep office here, like I discussed just now, is basically more for marketing purpose. So it allows your company to actually have more market exposure, and also at the same time, to explore different opportunities, because you will have a chief rep that you need to employ, right? The chief rep can be a foreigner, can be an Indonesian, and this person is actually going around to meet different customers, to actually open new markets and new opportunities for your company. Okay, now in terms of your the second question, which is the bank account, yes, the RO can open a bank account. But opening a bank account, I must add that the company must be disciplined, all right, in the sense that they do not so-called misuse this account.
Sorry to interrupt, Pak Andrew.
Yes.
But is it mandatory to open a bank account? Is it a mandatory?
Rep office?
Yeah.
Yeah. In a sense, I would say it's not mandatory under the law. There's no clear expression under the law that the rep office will need to open a bank account. But in a sense, you can operate using cash, but that will raise a few eyebrows in terms of tax compliance, right? So you put your money under your pillow when you sleep, or what, So okay. So in terms of the answer is no, it's not mandatory. But in terms of operations wise, it's a lot easier lah, especially if you have Indonesian employees, because you need to pay the bank account, pay the bank accounts through the employee salary through the bank account, right? You're not going to give him cash, right? Or yeah, it's possible, but in terms of compliance wise, tax compliance, legal compliance is going to be a hassle lah. So okay, so with regards to the bank account, it's better to have one. It's easier to operate your rep office if you have one. So in terms of what I said, the misuse part is it's many a time. Sometimes I see that the companies operating a rep office, they will actually deposit monies from the Indonesian customers to this account. This is a big no-no, because you see the rep office, even though you're not generating income, you will need to have a tax ID, the NPWP they call it, Nomor Pokok Wajib Pajak, for the rep office. So in terms, you need to actually file tax reports on an annual basis. And if there are certain discrepancies with regards to this, bank account transfers and the, credit and debit system, then that's where, the tax officer may take an interest. And when that happens, usually, things may get complicated if not handled properly.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, talking about setting up a company, talking about payment just now. For a PT payment to set up, you need two directors, right? Minimum.
Shareholders, sorry.
Shareholders.
Okay, sorry, shareholder. So there'll be a commissioner down there, stated down there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Does the commissioner have the right to issue or sign a check, for payment to the employment or payment to vendors or, to customers? Is it possible, or is only the rights of the director only?
Ibu Angeline, or shall I?
Yes.
Okay, so we go back to the basic company law side. The directors are the people who operate the company, who operate and manage the company. So therefore, they have the right to represent the company. Now, commissioners, they don't operate the company. All right, they don't manage the company. All right, so they only monitor the directors. So having said this, on this principle alone, the answer would be, unfortunately, no. The commissioner will not have power to sign the checks or documents on behalf of the company under normal circumstances. Of course, there are certain scenarios where, for example, if the entire board of directors, they're incapacitated, or kena COVID, or kena, quarantine somewhere, So because of that, then the commissioners, yes, then they can come in under the law, all right, to step in. Alternatively, the board of directors can always give a POA, a power of attorney, all right, to a commissioner if needed, all right, to sign certain documents. So to put it to answer you in another way, is the commissioners can come in, but under special circumstances, which is not normal. Like, for example, like incapacitation of the entire the board of directors is not a normal thing. All right, the power of attorney is also not a normal thing. That means there must be an act, right, that triggers the right for the commissioner to step in. Okay, so if companies are being told that commissioners, as long as your name is in the acta, because this is what I get all the time, is, oh, my name is in the acta. The acta is the so-called constitution, all right, in your Singapore company, all right, your constitution, M&A last time. So then they will say, oh, my name is in the acta, so I can represent. It's a misconception. Like, also, I would like to, draw back to what Ibu Angeline said is, what's done in the market, it may not be 100% legal, because, in a sense, we do face situation where commissioners sign contracts and the other parties are actually, the counterparty in the event of dispute, they are refusing to acknowledge the existence of the contract, you see. So it's important to be very clear with the fundamental principles.
Addition to what mentioned about the policy of the company, what about the withholding tax for the director? What's the rate? What's the rate for the withholding tax for the directors, Pak Andrew?
Okay, withholding tax for directors. Okay, in terms of you're looking from the income tax perspective, okay, is in Indonesia the income tax is between 5 to 30%. It depends on which bracket you fall under. Okay, so in this case, the withholding tax is somewhat different from what you have in Singapore, because in Singapore, I don't think withholding tax is a common thing. It's quite new, right? So Indonesia, they practice this. They withhold you first. The joke of it is because they don't trust the people back then, all right? They don't trust that you will pay. So the government, I withhold you first, you pay on my behalf. You see, because if I pay the person may not pay. They may just disappear, right? So what happens is, so they withhold, but that was a joke lah. I mean, I know different countries operate under different systems, but this was a joke. Okay, it's a joke. Okay, so in the sense, what happens is, for example, if the withholding rate is 10%, okay, I give you an example. So $10, your professional income is $10. So $10 wise, if it's 10%, the company will withhold $1. All right, will withhold $1. All right, they'll take the $1 and pay to the government. The government will give you a receipt. All right, to say you have paid. Then they'll give you $9. All right. So that is how the withholding things works. I mean, I know in Singapore is you receive and then you declare and then you pay lah.
Correct.
Here is somewhat different. So we have to take note because many a times when the investors come in, they set up the company and they're not aware of tax compliance. They thought that, oh, it's the same as Singapore. Then to their horror, 6 months down the road, they appoint a tax consultant to help them do all this, and then wow, a whole 6 months all not in compliance. And then that's where, you know, if handled incorrectly, then that's where complications can happen.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Back to Pak Shoeb. Pak Shoeb, what do you think, Shoeb, from your links and your network in Indonesia Economic Forum that you have done previously? Maybe can you let us know, do capital of East Kalimantan going to be the next new capital, because there's a lot of opportunity in infrastructure, in technology, in manufacturing. No, so what's your thought on that? Because currently Kalimantan is more on the natural resources. So it will happen soon, or by Minister of Pak Luhut mentioned, or is it because of the COVID-19? So they will delay. What's your thought?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, President Jokowi has made it very clear that he wants the capital, the national capital, to move out of Jakarta, and they've selected East Kalimantan as the location. It will happen. In terms of the time frame, you know, I think COVID-19 will be probably a speed bump in terms of implementation towards getting that up and running. You know, the new capital, I think, will be a huge testing ground for a lot of new technologies, green technologies, because, you know, for example, the government has stated that they only want electric vehicles in the new capital. They want greener buildings, right? East Kalimantan, yes, you know, Kalimantan basically in the past has been a major source of natural resources, whether it's mining, you know, coal is big, plantations are big, you know. But, you know, the whole idea is that the Indonesian economy in general is moving away from a heavy dependence on natural resources. Natural resources will continue to be a major segment of GDP, but they want to move away from just heavily relying on commodities and natural resources to going towards two things. One is consumer-driven digital technologies, as I mentioned earlier. And secondly, you know, really is to boost the services sector. So the services sector is still, I would say, in its infancy. You know, I think Ibu Angeline and Pa Andrew are one of the leaders in services, right? Legal services, very critical going forward, especially as companies become more sophisticated, they need better legal advice. You know, accounting services, financial services, all this will depend on technology to grow, right? To boost. E-commerce is also a service industry, right? So all these industries will continue to grow because you will find that you have a larger, rapidly growing middle class. A middle class is where the services are consumed most, right? Today, the middle class is estimated to be around 50 million Indonesians, expected to double by 2045. So you're going to have a larger segment of the population wanting to consume services. Could be education. Education is a huge industry, right? Financial services, accounting services, legal services, and Indonesians themselves are becoming professionals. In the past, you know, the professional class was small, but today the professional class is also growing. So I think these are the key trends that you have to look at when you want to understand, you know, where things are moving generally, you know. As you're coming back to your question on the new capital could be a testing bed for many industries or technologies that can be applied to other cities across Indonesia, right? Not just limited to the new capital. But if something works there, you can actually take it to Semarang, you can take it to Medan, you can bring it to Jakarta. It's a Sulawesi, Balikpapan, so many cities across Indonesia, and you will find that urbanization is going to become a major part of Indonesia's growth story.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, this is overwhelming question we have, so it's good. We still have 1 hour to go, so we have time. Talking about Medan, talking about the cities, the top city in GDP growth is Jakarta, Surabaya, then coming up Medan, then going further down, the list go down to the bottom. Okay, a question to you, Ibu Angeline. If a company who want to set up in Indonesia, is it good to have their HQ or their first setup in Jakarta? Or is it good that it's based on the city that they have the business activities down there? What's your thought, Angeline?
Right. Now, most of our clients actually set up in Jakarta. In other words, domicile in Jakarta, although the operations can be elsewhere. Because if you have the license to set up the investment license with for a company domicile in Jakarta, you can also operate a business in other provinces. But on the other hand, there may be instances where you may want to have a branch in the relevant city. For example, you're domiciled in Jakarta, but you have a branch in Surabaya or in Kalimantan or Sulawesi. So maybe Andrew, you can add on to this.
Yeah. So basically, in a sense, you see, when the investor comes in, it really depends on the business model of the investor, right? So, I mean, of course, if it is in the services industry, then you can service clients from in Medan from Jakarta. It's fine. And usually, why we mentioned that it's it's faster to set up in Jakarta, because the Jakarta authorities are more familiar with the OSS system. Because I mean, with all due respect to my friends and colleagues in the Indonesian government, we have some cases where we went to some regional governments, they don't know what is OSS. They're like, apa itu, So in a sense, I mean, that was back then when it was previously launched. So I'm sure now they are aware. But even though when they're aware, sometimes OSS is like a major system, right? One system, all right, centralized system. But of course, you have different government. Indonesia has 34 provinces, right? So 34 provinces, you need to link up with this mothership. All right, so sometimes the linking up, some of the smaller provinces, they may link up slower, and then the IT system there may not be as efficient. So that is why, sometimes setting up in Jakarta will give you a shorter setup time. The time frame can be as short as less than 1 week. We've done before, helping a client set up in less than 1 week. But of course, when you set up, for example, in somewhere else, in other provinces, outside Jakarta, then it may take some time, because sometimes they still have their so-called regional regulations. When the regional regulations may impose certain steps before the investor can do a certain thing. So that is why the government, the president is also going to address this in the omnibus law to so-called simplify the licensing process, to make sure that wherever you invest in Jakarta, you can go to Aceh, Papua, for all that matter, to do a plantation in Papua. Yeah, it is the same. Okay, yeah. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it really helps a lot. Okay, talking about the city, how about, I mean, just to ask you guys, how about Batam? I mean, there's a BP Batam down there. Batam is also part of a lot of manufacturing sector down there. They also open a techno park down there also. So what do you think about Batam? Andrew?
Okay, in terms of Batam, all right, Batam is a very unique position, all right, in this whole Indonesian economy, all right. Maybe Pak Shura can elaborate. In a sense, from the legal perspective, okay, Batam, because of its special status, all right, they are saying that Batam may be the next free trade zone. SEZ, sorry, SEZ. It is a free trade zone now. Certain parts of it may become an SEZ. So it's important, all right, in terms of investments, all right, because it's known for its manufacturing. But of course, however, the authorities there will need to work closer with each other, the BP Batam and then the authority plus the mayor and all this. So from our experience is, the governments, they probably have to, see how they can work hand in hand closer to simplify regulations, which is again in spirit of with the omnibus law, all right, the omnibus law approach, to make Batam, I'll use Donald Trump to make Batam great again. Okay, so right now, because Batam all this while they have been, because I mean I have to be honest, in terms of image-wise, Batam, it's been suffering a little bit over the past few years. You have all the the industrial labor issues and the land complication and all that. So, which is unfortunate because Batam, given its geographical proximity to Singapore, it's really, really, really attractive.
Yeah, correct.
To have it there. You see, and then in terms of logistics as well, logistics-wise, if you set out in Batam, the logistics to the world is you can go anywhere, right, from Singapore, right? So it's rather unfortunate that the current state as it is right now. So we definitely hope that the government will again make Batam great again.
Yeah, if I can just add, Sham, on Batam, because we actually hosted a Indonesia Economic Forum in Batam 2 years ago. Where we engaged with the local Batam municipality as well as the BP Batam at that time, So the question for Batam really in the past has been legal certainty, because there was, the Batam authority was set up, under Suharto, which control investment and licensing, and they at that time they pushed for heavy manufacturing. And became very successful because a lot of heavy manufacturing moved from Singapore to Batam. And in that process, Batam attracted a lot of workers from across Indonesia. So there was cheap labor and land for manufacturing. A lot of Singapore manufacturing companies, especially shipbuilding, heavy manufacturing, moved to Batam. But in the past few years, that industry has been hollowed out, primarily because of this uncertainty. There was a tussle between the local government, the local mayor who is directly elected, and the head of BP Batam who was appointed by the central government. Mm-hmm. Now they have managed to resolve that issue. Now what is actually happening in Batam going forward is, I think the focus has moved from heavy manufacturing to actually digital industry. You've heard of Nongsa, the Nongsa Digital Park, which has become a major innovation center where a lot of startups are going. A lot of young people are actually being attracted to Batam to set up startups, in many different sectors. There are a lot of Singapore investors looking to partner with these young Indonesians who have startup companies, So I think the future of Batam may actually be very different from its past, because that industry is moved, but the new industries are being set up. But as Andrew mentioned, they need to resolve this issue of who controls Batam and who issues licenses. They've decided to make it an SEZ, but again there's some confusion around who controls the SEZ land, right, and all those issues. So I think Batam will be remade, right? In a sense, going forward, I think it's going to become a major innovation hub because of its proximity, geographical proximity to Singapore. It allows people to move up and down very easily. I know a lot of Singapore investors who actually go up and down on a daily basis to Batam.
Yes,
so,
and
yeah, go ahead, Ibu Angeline.
Thank you, Shoeb. Yeah, maybe I can just add one point. It's really very exciting, to see how Nongsa Digital Park develops and evolves, right? But one of the biggest challenges for the Singapore companies, in particular the startup, is the high capital amount, because for IT it's all here, the capital is all here, and you don't really need to have expensive machinery, equipment, etc. Right? So I was actually involved in some in a dialogue session with one of the top Indonesian senior coordinating ministers, and to reflect, what is the problem on the ground, what hinders the expansion of Singapore companies into the digital park in Batam. Yeah, because it's a sheer capital requirement, and I understand that various efforts have been made in order to persuade or explain to the authorities so that there could be perhaps a partial exemption, you know, for these tech startups. And in relation to the SEZs in Batam, it's not going to, my understanding is that it's not going to be the entire Batam. There will be certain enclaves, right? And I think Nongsa Digital Park may be one of them. So that if you set up in the SEZ, you know, Nongsa Digital Park, then it may be possible to be exempted, you know, from the usual high capital requirement. I think this will actually help jumpstart, you know, the development and make it a lot easier for Singapore companies to directly, you know, go in and invest in Nongsa Digital Park. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So, talking about foreign company, just want to add on a bit about the regulation. Pak Andrew and Bu Angeline, LKPM report, is it a mandatory report that we need to submit annually, other than tax matter?
Yes, LKPM report is actually, it depends on what entity you have right now. So if you are under a PMA company, then actually the LKPM report needs to be filed and reported every 3 months. So it's 10th of January, 10th of April, and so on and so forth. So you need to file that before the timeline. So, and it's actually quite a straightforward report. Actually, the government actually prescribes a format. Then of course the company would then need to fill in the certain details of its investment. So basically the report pertains to the realization of investment amounts, the manpower, what problems you have on the ground. You can write all this in and then you file to the government. And then basically as now BKPM goes digital, in their Instagram page, they will always remind investors that, tolong segera menyampaikan laporan LKPM, so it's in English will be please, a gentle reminder to file your LKPM reports. Yeah, because now with Instagram, then everyone gets to see them, you see. So I think that's one encouraging aspect of the Indonesian government is they're actually using technology to actually make things happen here.
Yeah, I saw that Pak Balil is very active in Instagram.
Yes.
He's very active in Instagram. And you have like a command center. Currently, if you look at their Instagram, they have a command center which they update every time on every single digit in every single region. What is the value of the market, everything. So it's quite good for us SMEs to keep updated in Instagram for BKPM. Actually, they are more active in Instagram, in social media, rather than from their website.
Yes, in a sense, they actually did a live streaming of the realization of the report, the Q1 investment realization. They were actually a few days ago. They actually did live streaming where they actually showed the investors, or whoever the participants of what are the numbers, in light of this COVID-19. So kudos to them. Yeah.
Talking about COVID-19, Pak Shoeb, back to you, Pak Shoeb.
Yes.
I read some article because you are quite experienced in media. I read some article. Even a factory in West Java who's manufacturing for Prada, they are changing. They are shifting to manufacturing surgical masks or other medical stuff that to help the government.
Right.
Do you think is there any opportunity because there's in terms of importing goods for medical supply is a bit quite relaxed from the government point of view? Do you think there's an opportunity down there, Pak Shoeb, for Singapore company to do an OEM with the China side and then move in and import it to Indonesia? What's your thought on that, Pak Shoeb?
Yes, I think there's a huge opportunity because there's a huge lack of such equipment in Indonesia, right? From masks to PPEs to other health protection, clothing. Indonesia at the moment, will see a spike in COVID-19 cases. A lot of hospitals do not have sufficient protective medical wear, for example, face shields, So for Singapore companies who really want, to help Indonesia in a sense, and also to maybe work with Indonesian companies, there is a huge opportunity. It doesn't have to be all manufactured in Indonesia. I think you can actually, maybe Andrew or Ibu Angeline can add to that. You can actually export these items into Indonesia, because the government has eased some of those restrictions because they need these products. So Singapore companies can actually help to source for these products from China, for example, and ship it to Indonesia.
Okay, that's good. Just going a bit more, we have another 30 more minutes going on currently. So other than that, how about on the property and in terms of currently the PSBB, yeah, Pak Andrew, Bu Angeline and Pak Shoeb, people are working from home, companies could not operate. If they operate, they could be fined 100 million rupiah. So that's equivalent to 10,000 Sing dollars. So what happened currently to the property sector? I mean, is there any rebate? Because I just spoke to Keppel Land. They have a rebate for their tenant, 50% rebate. I mean, that's for Keppel Land, but I'm talking about the overall, Pak Shoeb, because you're still in Indonesia right now. So what's happening in the property market? How things are going down there? Malls like Lipo malls, they close all their malls. And they will be opening up back maybe on 24 April, or maybe there's an extend towards a PSBB, social distancing. So what's your thought on that, Pak Shoeb?
Yes, I think the property sector is probably one of the hardest hit sectors in the economy, from commercial buildings to retail buildings, residential. The whole property market is, I don't know what the numbers are at the moment exactly, but it has been a huge drop, right? A lot of tenants, especially like you said in the malls, they're forced to close. So there's no revenue coming in. So how do they pay rent to the mall owners? And that's where some of the mall owners are now renegotiating with their tenants to see how they can offer some rebates or some discounts, to them. Commercial property, everybody's staying home, so nobody is going to the office. Right, and a lot of companies are actually facing a lot of pressure, revenue and cash flow pressure, which means that they will not be able to service their rental agreements. They will not be able to service other agreements they may have with landlords. We also see, for example, in the residential sector, especially in like the apartments. Right, suddenly it's dead. There's almost no transactions going on, very little transactions, probably because people are now holding on to their cash. Nobody's going to do a major transaction in this current environment. So in that sense, I think looking forward in the next, it will probably take a year, in my estimate, for the property sector to come back.
So do you think it's a good time for Singapore companies to look to invest in property?
I will tell you, there is a lot of interest from property funds to come into Indonesia today, because there is basically, I wouldn't call it distressed assets, but property developers need cash injections. So depending on your investment philosophy and depending on your business model, in fact, it's a good opportunity for Singapore property companies or property funds to start looking at partnering with Indonesian property owners, or even acquiring assets from them. There are hotels for sale. Hotel chains are going for sale, right? Because they can't keep. But this is, you really have to look at it as a short-term, like I say, speed bump, right? If you look longer term, let's look 3, 4, 5 years down the road. This economy has great resilience. Indonesia's economy, the spending power will come back. Domestic tourism will start to also come back. So I think in terms of your question, yes, it could be an opportunity for investors to start looking, for potential asset acquisitions in Indonesia.
Okay, one final question, then maybe we can close it. Then we can see you guys again in the next future webinar.
Sure.
Look at the trend. The economic growth will be only around 0.5%, but Ministry Sri Mulyani is very positive, looking at more than 2.3 2.3%, if I'm not mistaken. And there'll be a rebound on a positive outlook, almost to 8%. But recently, I did have some webinar with from ASEAN, like Tan Sri Munir, mentioned the numbers. Does it look was this realistic, Pak Shoeb? In terms of your view, recently you just commented in Business Time article.
Yes, yes. I think the GDP growth this year is going to be sharply down. Whether I think it's going to be very difficult to gauge whether it's in negative, meaning a contraction, or still a very small percentage growth. It really depends on how long this pandemic lasts, right? But I will definitely say that there will be a lot of short-term pain within the Indonesian economy. I already see a lot of companies looking to furlough or ask their workers to take pay cuts. The companies that are yesterday, for example, the Minister for Industry actually made a comment about companies going to banks to borrow to pay employees. I don't think not many owners are going to use that, right? I mean, if you borrow money, you got to repay. Yeah. You have no business. So this kind of issues will become very critical for business owners. SMEs, especially, we talked about Indonesia's what I call gray economy. The Indonesia's gray economy is about 44 to 45% of GDP, which is huge, which means companies that operate and hire people outside of the official economy for example, Gojek drivers, are they part of the official economy or are they part of the unofficial economy? They're unofficial because they don't have contracts. They don't have work contracts, right? If they don't make money for the day, that's it. They have no money. They have no food on the table. So that kind of pain, I think, is going to be very severe going forward, primarily because the economy is closed. We talk about malls. You think about all the salespeople in the malls. What are they going to do? They got no jobs now. They are paid, weekly or even daily salaries. So again, in that sense, I think the pain is going to be quite severe, at least in the short term.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Shoeb. I think moving ahead on this COVID-19 SMEs, just on my own thoughts, we need to reboot. Yeah, we need to reboot. We need to look back and how we're going to enter the market again, how we're going to play the game again, and also in Singapore, we are very fortunate. We have Enterprise Singapore, who's always very supportive in terms of going internationalization. And on top of that, SBF have a Global Connect program initiated by Enterprise Singapore too. So looking at also partners like you all would help along the journey for internationalization to our SMEs in Singapore. Thank you so much for all your time. Maybe last words, last quote from you guys, starting by Angeline, please, Angeline.
Yes, I would like to thank Pak Shoeb and Pak Shoeb, and in particular SPF and Enterprise Singapore, for this wonderful opportunity for us to have this webinar and to share our experiences with all the participants. And I would also like to extend sincere thanks to all the participants for all your support, and hope to see you guys again in future webinars and similar events.
Soon we're going to have again, and I'm very content and happy if I can invite you guys again.
Thank you so much. Always siap, Pak.
Yeah. As Indonesia is
so much.
Yeah, as Indonesia is ranking in Singapore FDI #1, FDI foreign investment for Singapore is ranking #1 in Indonesia. So we sure have a lot of seminars and webinars going on to discuss and to support SMEs to go to Indonesia.
Thank you.
How about Pak Shoeb? Any last words?
Yes, thank you again, Pak Shoeb and Enterprise Singapore for having me on this webinar. together with such distinguished panelists as Ibu Angeline and Pak Andrew. I think my parting words for all our participants and for basically Singapore's SMEs, look at Indonesia's growth trajectory over a longer period of time. I think, what we are facing today with COVID-19 is, like you said, an opportunity for us to rethink and reboot. But if you look longer term, Indonesia offers huge potential. I think there are very few markets in Asia that offer, that have all the ingredients of being a successful economy going forward, right? Singapore and Indonesia have always over the last 40, 50 years been partners. They each have their own strategic advantages, I think this current crisis will actually open up a lot more opportunities for Singapore companies who want to come to Indonesia. Like I mentioned, earlier, in many sectors that today may be very small, but they will grow very fast. Indonesia has always depended in Singapore for investments, but also for ideas. And I think this is a great opportunity for Singapore companies to help to work with Indonesia to find innovations and new solutions to the challenges that Indonesia faces.
Okay, that's good.
So, thank you very much, and I hope to be a participant in your future webinars. Thank you, Sham.
I think more than person become a speaker soon.
Yeah.
Okay, Pak Andrew, any last word, Pak Andrew?
Yes. So thank you so much to everyone, SBF, Asyam, Soeb, Angeline, and also the participants for your time. And we really hope that this session is helpful. And of course, if you do have any queries, and I've been getting a lot of Q&A regarding the slides, I'm sure we will work together with SBF to see how we can share this with you. And then, of course, if you have any further queries, you can always contact me on my WhatsApp, on the email. And of course, take care and stay safe. Let's all work together, right, to beat the curve, to flatten the curve, to reduce hospitalization rates and to reduce infection rates. Okay, because we're all in this together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Together we overcome this. And I just want to add on, maybe we have a one-on-one advisory. Pak Andrew, in regards to some inquiries on here, there's quite overwhelming inquiry down here. So we can take it offhand later. Nonetheless, thank you everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you for participating in this event. Thank you to all attendees. And if I do not answer any of your Q&A, please drop me an email. I will get back to you guys as soon as possible. And I saw they need some reports. Let me know whichever can help you. As a country head in SBF for the Global Connect program initiated by Enterprise Singapore, I'm here ready for you to help out. By the way, I forget to introduce myself. I've been in Indonesia for almost 6 years. I was in the retail and manufacturing industry last time. So hopefully I can assist you guys in utilization soon. I mean, during the COVID-19 period, like I mentioned, and Pak Shoeb also said, let's reboot and think how we're going to move forward in the future, and also go into SBF portal. There's also overseas market workshop. We have other webinar going on to educate you guys to get more information about each market down there, and also do into portal of Enterprise Singapore, look at what support and measures that they will be giving us to go global. Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you for your time, and I will see you guys again. And we are having a webinar again during May. So see you guys again. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Participants. Yes, we have. Thank you.